everyone, Kelly here, and today I wanted to share with you all the things I read in the third week of January. So I'm still continuing on reading smaller books and short stories. This week everything is fiction, I believe. I didn't read any nonfiction this week, so all short fiction. But this was also kind of a weird week because I had my first DNF of 2021, and I had more than one 2-star and a couple things I didn't rate because I just didn't really know how I felt about them, or I had mixed feelings about them. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. So I'm gonna start, I'll tell you my DNF and then talk about the short stories that I read, and then go into the novellas kind of in the order that I read them. So first of all, the DNF that I did was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amel El Motar and Max Gladstone. And this one was all over BookTube last year, and a lot of people really love this book, and so I felt bad that I put it down. I didn't get very far into it. I only got like 16 pages in, which seems pretty quick to put it down. And this might be one that I might pick back up at some point, maybe. But the thing with this one was it wasn't anything to do with plot or characters, obviously, since it was so early. It was just the writing. This is very flowery writing, and I just was having trouble concentrating even on like what was happening. Like I kept, even with 16 pages, it took me so long. I reread every page like over more than once. Like I think I read those 16 pages probably at least 3 times because I just couldn't get into the writing. And it was slowing me down. It was putting me into a slump because I would read like one page, reread that page, and then put it down. And yeah, so I just don't think this is the time to read it. Maybe someday I'll pick it back up and really focus on it and try to like figure it out. But for some reason, my brain was just not able to like interpret the words on the page into coherent thoughts. And then in terms of short stories, I had read The Yellow Wallpaper a couple weeks ago or last week. So check one of my earlier January recent reads for that. But then because I had read The Yellow Wallpaper and really liked it, I wanted to check out some of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's other works because I had this like collection of her short stories from the library, and I figured before I return it I would just try a couple and see if I wanted to read the whole collection or if The Yellow Wallpaper was a one-hit wonder or whatever. And no, I can't like definitively say that I won't like any of her other work, but I read 2 of the short stories and I just didn't feel pulled to read the rest of these. I didn't rate them on Goodreads or even rate them in as read because they were really short and I just didn't feel anything about them. In case you're curious, the 2 stories I read were called If I Were a Man and The Cottagette. Yeah, and they just weren't compelling enough for me to want to read more. So at this point, The Yellow Wallpaper is the only thing I'm going to read by this author, and I'm okay with that because I gave her another try and I just wasn't feeling invested in that. And then the other short story collection I read the entire collection. And this was, I think in last week's I had mentioned that I had read a couple short stories and I wasn't going to review them because I wanted to read the entire collection because I just loved the short stories so much. And that is Daphne du Maurier's Classics of the Macabre. This edition is illustrated by Michael Foreman, and this edition I think is out of print because when I looked it up, because I almost was going to buy this edition because I loved it so much, but it was like $200 online because it's out of print, so it's like you have to get it used. But if you have it at your library, it's a fun edition because it's got like these big pictures that he has illustrated, and some of them are like small pictures. I don't want to like give you spoilers with the pictures, so but yeah, there are some really beautiful like full page illustrations, so I really liked this edition. So like I said, it's out of print, but you might be able to get it from your library. If not, all of these short stories are in other short stories collections that are still in print. Like I think she has a short story collection called The Birds and Other Stories, and one called Don't Look Now and Other Stories. Both of those stories were in this book, and I think all of these would be in those other collections. But there's 6 stories in here, and I loved all of them. I love the way her stories had like a dark, sinister atmosphere. Like they're not downright like scary or anything like that, but there's just this like overwhelming like feeling of like, you know, bad feeling of like creepiness that's going on. And a lot of them, not every single one, but a lot of them had to do with like the psyche of the person that we're following, like the main character, and kind of the problems that they are facing in their life or in their mind that kind of lead to this almost like appearance of the supernatural. And sometimes there might actually be something supernatural, or it could be their mind like manifesting this supernatural thing because of what they're going through. And I just loved that mix of kind of like an analysis of a person's psyche combined with possible sinister forces and all that stuff. They were super interesting. Every single story in here was like a 4 or 5 star story. And how often does that happen when you read a collection of stories and like every single one? Editing Kelly here. So in this video, I was going to go through every single story and talk about it, but then like my video turned out to be like 35 minutes long. So I think because I love these so much, I'm just going to do a dedicated review where I can talk about each of the stories inside the collection, spoiler free, but just kind of, since there are only 6 stories, just kind of talk about the themes that they cover and stuff like that. So look for that. Hopefully by, you know, the next couple weeks, I can get that full review out so that I don't end up adding a whole bunch of time to this video. All right, and now let's move on from the short stories. I had 2 things that are more like graphic in nature, so I don't know if they would count as short stories or what. They're more just like graphic novels or cartoons. So maybe I'll just talk about those next. And the first one is How to Tell If Your Cat is Plotting to Kill You. And I don't know who the actual artist is, but their like name is the Oatmeal. I guess that maybe I don't know if that's a company or if that's just what the person goes by. But this is just a collection of like cartoons about cats. And I had picked this up at a library sale for like 25 cents. And I thought it would be funny. I thought it'd be just cute cat cartoons that would make me laugh because I'm a cat owner and lover of cats. And this is really disappointing. I did not find most of these humorous. I ended up giving this 2 stars. I only found like the first few comics interesting and funny. And then it like went way downhill. Like they had a couple that were on their own. And then it started this like thing called the Bobcats, which I would say more than a third of this book is about the Bobcats. And there are 2 cats named Bob that work in an office. And so it's a lot of office humor, which I didn't find very funny. And maybe that's just me because I don't work in an office. But yeah, I didn't find that funny. And then after the Bobcats, there was like a couple cartoons that had like offensive stuff, like homophobic things, or things that seemed to me like they were being homophobic. I don't know if that was what the author's intention was, but yeah, I found it pretty offensive. And so 2 stars, a couple of them were funny, but for the most part, this is disappointing and I'll be getting rid of this copy. And then the other graphic thing I read was Creepy Susie and 13 Other Tragic Tales for Troubled Children by Angus Oblong. And this is something that I bought and read purely for nostalgia. So when I was in college, my friends and I did a play based on this collection of tales, and I just wanted to revisit the source material. And as an adult, I would say I enjoy this more for nostalgia's sake than actual for what the content was, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But if you're somebody that has a really dark sense of humor, like maybe like, I don't want to, everybody in the reviews was comparing this to Tim Burton, and I don't know that it's necessarily on the caliber of Tim Burton, but it's definitely that more like macabre kind of humor, and it's definitely meant for adults. Like the title is a joke. This is definitely adult content. There's sexual stuff in here. There's lots of killing and things like that. You can see the art style is very simplistic and it's just very like one sentence on a page. So if you have a darker macabre sense of humor, you might want to pick this up and try it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I was just reading it purely for that nostalgia, and I didn't end up rating it because I don't know how I would feel if I didn't have those feelings from the past, because I was like, as an adult, I don't know that this is like my favorite humor anymore. So yeah, and then now I have the rest of the things are all like novellas. So the first one I picked up I don't have a copy of because it was like a last minute get from like an ebook from the library because I was in the mood for a romance, and I read The Governess Affair by Courtney Milan. So at the beginning of January, I was going to try a Courtney Milan book because I was kind of going to give up on historical romance, but I had heard great things about Courtney Milan. So I picked up the Mrs. Martin's Improbable Adventure. That's the one I picked up and I reviewed in that first week of January reviews, and I loved that book. 4 stars. I thought the heroine was hilarious, and I just really enjoyed the like female empowerment in that book, and still having a romance and still being in like Victorian times or whatever, and I really enjoyed it. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try another one of her novellas just to see if the reason I liked that one was the one I read at the beginning of January had like older characters in it. All the characters were over, like the two main characters were over 69. So I thought, well, maybe I only liked it because of that. So I wanted to try one that was a male-female relationship with a younger female protagonist, so like somebody in there, I think she's probably in her 20s or early 30s, I'm not for sure. And I loved this one. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I just think that Courtney Milan is like the perfect historical romance author for me, because she has those elements of it being historical, like accurate to the times and all that stuff, but still having female characters that are very strong and do everything they can to kind of fight the place that society wants to put them in. And I don't know, I just really enjoy her heroines that I've read so far. I've only read 2. And this one is part of a series, but you could read it on its own because it's actually a prequel. And this is about a woman named Serena who is fired from her job as a governess, and the person that is responsible for her being fired is this Duke, and I can't remember his name, so we're just gonna call him the Duke. And so she's upset and wants compensation for the fact that she is fired and now has no way and no references, no way to get another job. So she decides to basically protest and sit outside of his house until he gives her some kind of compensation. And the other character in this is a man who is basically the Duke's fixer. So his job is just to fix any troubles in the Duke's life, in his financial life or personal life. And basically Duke's like, you need to fix this, get rid of her. She's going to get in the way with my wife and our reconciliation and all that stuff. So get her out of the way. And so the fixer, his name is Hugo, and he's pretty like, has a reputation for being pretty harsh and like, making, you know, if he wants something done, it's going to get done. But then he meets his match in Serena, and I just loved their dialogue. Was like the best banter that I have read in a long time. I'm pretty picky about my like hate to love romances, because I don't like it when the dialogue back and forth is mostly one person being really mean, and that person kind of having to like change to suit the other one. This one, they're like equal, I feel like, and their dialogue to each other is witty and fast and super entertaining. I loved the way they interacted with each other. So if you're like me and you're like more into like the Much Ado About Nothing kind of hate to love romance, I would like definitely say pick this one up. Yeah, loved their conversation. I loved the way the book progressed. It's a novella, so things do kind of happen quickly, but I felt like it had a natural progression and it didn't feel forced or fast at all. And that's all for the general view. I am going to say something about content warnings or trigger warnings, but sometimes it wasn't in the description. So if you don't want to have any spoilers about stuff that might happen a little bit into it, it's a novella, so it's not that far in. But if you don't want to know that, but if it's not going to like spoil the ending, it's just going to be like talking about what content warnings are in this. So skip to the next book if you don't want to hear anything past that main description. So I want to talk a little bit about content warning on this, because there is talk about sexual assault and things like that in this book. And I was warned about it ahead of time by another booktuber, and this book in particular just really made me think of that discussion about whether or not to give content warnings or trigger warnings or whatever you want to call them, because sometimes they can be seen as spoilers. But I also think it's really important for some people, because I am glad I knew going into this that this would have sexual assault in it. I still read it. I was told by that reviewer that even though it involved sexual assault, it was very sensitively done, and that Courtney Milan did it in a way that like shows that this happens and how a person moves on from that event and what they can do, like how they could like be in a relationship again after that and heal from a very bad sexual experience. And I really appreciated that reviewer saying that, because if I don't usually, when somebody says that there's sexual assault in a book, I generally don't pick it up, because when you just say there's sexual assault, I don't know how it's going to be handled, and sometimes it really bothers me, and might even actually what you call trigger. Like when I was reading this book, I don't know what you call trigger, but for me, I felt triggered in the fact that like when that moment in the book was discussed, I was sent right back to something that happened in my past, and I relived that moment. I relived all the emotions and the feelings of that moment, and so that's what I think it means to be triggered by something. But because the author handled it in such a sensitive way, and such a way of talking about healing and knowing that you can have a good sexual experience after sexual assault, I think that is what like kept me in the story. And even though, yes, it did bring up those thoughts again, I was able then to be back into the character's story and like see that, you know, same thing with my life, that there has been healing and there is like a way to move past that and still have a good sexual relationship after assault. So that is just my thoughts a little bit about the importance of trigger warnings, but I understand needing to put them sometimes under spoiler warnings and stuff like that. All right, so I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to try to move on faster. So the next two things that I read were sequels, so I'm not going to talk about them much. I read Rogue Protocol and Exit Strategy of Martha Wells. This is book 3 and 4 in Murderbot series. I still am loving this series. It's fun. It's fast-paced. I love Murderbot. If you want to hear about my review in the first one, look at my earlier January wrap-ups and see what I thought about earlier. And then the next one is one I did not enjoy. I read A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. This is about two teenagers that go on their first date out on a canoe, and they find a house at the bottom of a lake. And it's like a whole house just sitting in the bottom of the lake, and they want to go explore it. And just kind of, it's about their relationship over this summer developing and them, you know, experiencing more of this house and this phenomenon and all that. And I just did not like this at all. I gave it 2 stars. I hated the dialogue, like absolutely hated the dialogue. Like I wonder if I could even find one example to show you, but it was like, I swear that the dialogue had a max of 3 words in it. Like obviously I don't want to like spoil anything, but here's just like 6 sentences in a row. It says, "My grandmother reads Agatha Christie. She's great." "Really?" "Yeah." "Okay. I mean it. I believe you. So what happened?" Like that is like the conversation. It's like one word back and forth. And I'm just like, this doesn't tell me anything about the characters. It doesn't develop anything in the story or in their relationship. It made me like completely feel like I didn't know these people at all. Even though it's a short book, you could add some more dialogue to at least give them some personality. So yeah, hated the dialogue. And then I just was kind of bored with the whole plot. It seems like a great concept, but between when they were not in the water, their dialogue was so stilted and boring and didn't develop them at all. And then when they're in the water, it just felt like I was going on a house tour. Like I'm shopping for houses and I'm going on a house tour. And it was not that interesting to me. I know a lot of people love Josh Malerman. I just think he's not for me. This is the second book I've read and given him 2 stars. So I think his writing is just not my style. So I'm no longer going to read Josh Malerman. I have no like problem with him. And I know a lot of people are fans. We just don't mix well. I just don't like his writing. And then I ended up picking up Sula by Toni Morrison. I had never read anything by Toni Morrison, and I don't know why. I don't know why I hadn't read it in school or anything, and why I waited till I was like 39 years old to read Toni Morrison, because her writing is beautiful, which I don't have to tell you. I mean, she is extremely famous and a popular author, so I don't even know what I could tell you. I didn't end up rating it because I just didn't know how to rate it, because I think that my expectations going in the book, because of like what it says on the description, was so different than what actually happened that I'm having trouble figuring out how to rate it. Like I feel like I really enjoyed her writing and I loved the characters were so well developed, the conversations, like the comparison between the two. I mean, this was horrible dialogue. This was dialogue that felt like you're in the room and experiencing this conversation in real life. So like writing, 5 stars, but like I was confused by the story because the description said it's about this girl, Sula, and her best friend and their relationship starting in childhood and going into their adulthood. But like, they don't even come into the book really until 50 pages in, and this is only like 160 page book. And so there's a lot about Sula's like mother and Sula's grandmother and then other people in their communities. So really, if I'd gone into this book not knowing the synopsis and just gone into it and kind of just seen the town and the community and all the personalities of the people and just like this generational story, I would be more firm in my rating, but I think I need to like get farther away from where I heard the description, and then I can like be like, yes, this was an amazing book. I was just confused for a long time reading it. Like, where's Sula? Like, her name's in the title. I was just confused for a long time. But I do think it was beautiful. I'm really looking forward to reading more Toni Morrison. And next time, I'm just not even going to read the description. I'm just going to go into it without knowing anything about it and pick up something like Beloved or The Bluest Eye. I think those are two of her most popular books. So I'm going to pick up one of those and just enjoy her writing. And then the last book that I read was The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. And this is just kind of like an old-fashioned ghost story, in case you haven't heard of it. So this is about a man named Arthur Kipps, who is a solicitor, and he is sent to this small town because this older woman has died and has left her manor without any like direct descendants. And so the solicitor has to go through her papers, see what's important so that they can, you know, figure out what to do with her estate and all that. And when he gets there, the town is very like mysterious about like him going to this house, and like he says, well, I'll just go and stay out at the manor because it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, instead of staying in town. And everybody's like, oh, are you sure you want to do that? And it turns out, you know, a lot of creepy things go on at this manor house. And like I said, it's just a good old-fashioned ghost story. It's just like that super creepy atmosphere and, you know, noises and things like that are happening. So if you're like someone like me, I don't usually read horror because I'm always afraid there's gonna be like really gross stuff in it, like animal mutilation or like, you know, torture or things like that. Like I need to know going in there's not gonna be that stuff in a book. So this book does not have stuff like that. It's just creepy, like creepy stuff going on, haunting stuff going on. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I wasn't like really scared. Like I was like spooked and creeped out, but I loved the creepy atmosphere. But I ended up reading this right before bed last night because I was 30 pages from the end, and I don't normally read scary things right before bed, but I'm like, I'm not really that scared. Like it has like a fun atmosphere, but it's not scaring me. So I'll just read it right before bed. Went to bed, was fine, didn't have nightmares or anything like that. And then I was woken up, it was still like pitch black out. I was woken up by this pounding, like repeated pounding, like incessant pounding over and over and over again. And I was like, what is going on? Like I got out of bed. My husband sleeps through everything. So he was completely sleeping through all this like pounding. I come to like the door of my bedroom, and it is completely dark. Our bedroom's off the living room. It's completely dark out there, and we usually always leave a lamp on because my kids' rooms are upstairs, and so we like to make sure if they come down with like a nightmare or something that the light is on. But my husband must have forgot to turn the light on last night, so it was like completely dark, and there's just this pounding, and I go out, and I'm like, what's happening? Is somebody at my door in the middle of the night? Like, what's happening? And then I find it's a cat. It's one of my cats, like pawing over and over and over again on a door, obviously thinking it was like time to eat, even though there's no light out. Normally he's fed in the morning, but for some reason he decided the day after I read a ghost story to wake me up in the middle of the night, pounding on a door over and over again. And yeah, it was not the most pleasant thing to experience after a ghost story. Yeah. So I was not scared by this, but that made my experience this morning more scary. But I think anybody would have been scared about waking up in complete darkness and your house being completely dark to like a very loud pounding that was like happening over and over and over again. So I'm not the only one that would be scared by that. Anyways, those are the books that I read this week. I talked a lot. I'm sorry, but I enjoyed some things a lot. Like, obviously I talked a lot about my favorites, but then I also had some things that I really didn't like, and then everything in between. So that's it. If you would like to talk about any of these, I would love to hear from you down below. And I just have one more week of reading these shorter fiction, so there'll be another wrap up at the end of January for the last week. See you next time. Bye.